Okay, this question is, when did you start developing games? The colors on this are not that right. Let me... okay, no, no. A little less contrast, I don't know. No. Well, it doesn't really matter. I'll just keep it on sepia, so that looks okay. The question is, when did you start developing games? Wait, now it's out of sync. I see myself moving about a second before. Let me turn sepia off. How do I do that? Okay, now it's back in sync. Let me try that again. This seems to be working now. I probably should cut all this part out, but it's kind of funny to keep it. But no, now it's delayed again. Just let me go back to normal. Okay, you're just gonna have to bear with the bad colors and the crazy intro. When did I start developing games? 1994 was when, developing computer games is when it was 1994. But before then, I started designing games and inventing games out of pens and pennies and money and cards and chess and making new rules out of everything. So it's sort of very early, like 1982 or something, I would guess. But when I actually got a computer, I got the computer in 1994, I think, and that was when I started programming games in QBasic, which is sort of like BASIC, but it's a DOS version. It comes with DOS, came as DOS 6.2 or whatever the version of DOS I had was. And I started making, the first game I made was sort of like it came with a game called Gorillas, then I edited it and made it slightly different Gorillas just to play around with the coding to see. So, but what the first game I made entirely myself was called Munchers, which is sort of like a Pac-Man clone, except that you don't continuously move, and the mazes were randomly generated, and you could eat through walls. But it was basically similar to Pac-Man other than that. It had different graphics, like the ghosts were red squares and the player was a white circle or whatever. I might still have the program. I think I once made a upload with all the old QBasic programs that I wrote, and that would be one of them. I made a lot of QBasic games after that, in 1994 through 1997. Like, there's one game that doesn't have that the first word is a blank line, and you write your name in it, and then like the game asks the player for their name, and then after it knows the player's name, then it names the game after that person's with a apostrophe S plus kingdom. Like if your name is Paul, it would say Paul's Kingdom is the name of the game. So I thought that was kind of funny because I hadn't heard of a game where the title adapts itself to the player's name before. Another game I made was a bunch of general dungeon crawlers called the Seeker series. There was first Seeker, second Seeker, third Seeker. The second one was the only one that was actually finished. The other two didn't get finished, which I had a habit when in the early years of not finishing games, like most game developers. I didn't really start finishing games regularly until like Alpha 6 in 2005, so it took me like over 10 years to get into the habit of finishing games. So after I finished QBasic games, which was through 1997, then I started developing C games, not C++, just normal C. The compiler was PowerC. But the first game I made, and that was like another game in the Seeker series, which is like dungeon crawlers. They had some interesting innovations, so I don't want to say they're just dungeon crawlers, but Like, for instance, it created a line across the screen, and as your sword slash, and depending on the colors of the enemies, the parts of them that the line intersected, it did different amounts of damage. Like, if your line intersected red, it did more damage. If it did blue, it did less damage, because blue was armored parts. So, okay, then after I made a few games in C, I started planning a really long game in C. It was based on, I was reading about Egypt at the time, so I was going to make a role-playing game set in Egypt. But that never got finished. But I spent an enormous amount of time. Like, I made the fonts out of on graph paper, and then I copied them into the game, because the only way to make fonts back then was to make arrays of bits because I didn't know how to import sprites. I probably could have figured it out, but I didn't, so I just had to make all the sprites out of arrays of bits, and each number was a color, and it was a really incredibly complex process, which normal game designers who learned game design from books or something wouldn't have had to do. But I was so enthusiastic about making it that I didn't even read anything about how other game developers made things. I just tried anything. Okay, after C, I started using the OHR RPG CE, which is, I started using that in 1999, I think, and basically I used that from 1999 to 2005 for like 6 years. I made a bunch of games in that. The first one I worked on was Winged Mean with Chimera. That's sort of how I met her. She's still the artist for Saturated Dreamers for the creatures, but I met her all the way back then in 1999, and I started helping her with her game, Winged Mean. I did the battle balance, and later on I did a dungeon and the plot scripting. They call it plot scripting, but it's not just for plot, it's for any type of script, and the game was called plot scripting for the OHR. I don't know why. And the other OHR games I've made were And. There's a game called And, which is sort of like a level up game. My cat is over here. It's sort of like a short game I made in 48 hours. And there's a lot of other OHR games. If you go to my site or my Wikia entry under the TIGS wiki, it lists them all. Like, all my OHR games and Game Maker games are listed there. I don't know if my QBasic games are listed there. Probably not. Maybe they are. And then after that was Game Maker, Alpha 6, Immortal Defense, and now Saturated Dreamers. I guess that you didn't want the whole life story of my games. You just wanted when. But I figured just listing a year would be more boring. Okay, bye.